Hi, everyone. This is the 50 States Highpointing podcast and YouTube channel. What started off as a project for a communications class has turned into something that I actually love doing. I have the privilege of providing the platform for people to talk about the extraordinary things they do in the outdoors. Highpointing is the challenge of reaching the highest elevation in each of the 50 states. Highpointers don't get paid for their hobby. No one is sponsored by an outdoor company, and people fit this challenge into their everyday lives that also include careers and family. I found through these interviews that people who attempt this challenge are incredible and genuinely enjoy talking about their experiences. If you consider yourself a Highpointer and you want to share your story on this podcast or interview, please send me an email at 50stateshighpointingpodcast@gmail.com. It has been a pleasure speaking with every Highpointer. I hope you enjoy. Hi, everyone. Welcome to the 50 States Highpointing podcast. I'm your host, Lauren, and today we're talking with Trey from Maryland. Trey, welcome.
Thanks. Glad to be here.
Can you tell our listeners and viewers a little bit about how you got started highpointing and what got you in the outdoors?
Sure. Really, I've kind of always been into the outdoors. So growing up, going out the back door, playing outside until it was dark, mom calling me in for dinner. But really, when I got into high school, there's a kind of a transformation for me. So I am originally from Pennsylvania. I live in Maryland now, but I grew up in a little town called Franklin. And right around middle school time frame, we moved to the eastern side of Pennsylvania, to the Lancaster area. And so I went to high school there. They had an outdoors club. In outdoors club, I got really exposed to backpacking, rock climbing, and just other outdoor stuff. So that's how I really got into backpacking. I would say backpacking and rock climbing led me more towards mountaineering. And I did my first high point probably when I was 18. So it's been a few years ago now. I won't say how long. I wanted to go and do some mountaineering. So we climbed Mount Washington. Took me a couple attempts to get up there, but that was my first high peak, and kind of been building on that ever since.
Wow, you don't usually hear about someone's first high point being Mount Washington.
Yeah, and so the other thing that's unique about my high points is all of them are winter ascents. So if I've done a high point, I did Mount Rogers last year in April. And this year I was like, hey, I didn't do that as a winter ascent. I want to go back and do it this year. So I just got back in end of December. Usually I go between Christmas and New Year's, and that's when I plan my high points. I generally have that week off and went and did that and hit Virginia again and got my winter ascent.
Wow. So do you think you'll continue this winter ascent trend as you start highpointing from east to west?
That's the plan. So everything I've done is winter ascents. I'm planning to stick with that. I think I only know, I actually called the Highpointers Club and asked them like, hey, who's done winter ascents? There's one person, there's actually a book out by them. I can't remember their name off the top of my head. But somebody else has done winter ascents. I think Denali will probably be a tough one.
Sure.
That's one I'd be concerned about and definitely have some plans. There's some other ones, like I think Granite Peak in Montana would be a challenge in the winter because there's actually some fifth class climbing on there. So those are ones that are going to be more of a challenge as I get down the road. But so far, they've not been too bad. Definitely like the Northeast high peaks have been the tough ones with Washington, Marcy, Mansfield, and Katahdin.
Can you talk about some of your experiences, good and bad? What was unique about the ones that really stand out?
Yeah. So Washington will always have a kind of little place there. So it took me 2 or 3 times, I think, to get up Washington. So the first time was a big learning experience. I had planned more like a backpack so we only went up about halfway, stayed at the shelters up there at Hermit Lake. and
Okay.
we're camping and trying to hike some of the peaks around. So the first day we tried to go up Tuckerman's Ravine, and we got up onto the Alpine Garden, and I ended up turning around because it was total fog. You couldn't tell the difference between snow and sky. So I was kind of uncomfortable up there with that,
Sure.
and worried that, hey, am I going to be able to find my direction and get back down? Um,
Hmm.
when we were actually coming back down that first time, going back into the ravine, it was just over the ravine, and I must have stepped on a rock, and it was covered with snow and ice, and that I actually had to do a self arrest with that. So I ended up falling
Whoa.
like 15, 20 feet, was able to self arrest and come back down, but that was definitely a memorable experience. Um,
So where did you get your self-arrest skills? Was it in the mountaineering that you did when you were younger, or was it just instinct?
so that was one. So I kind of have taught myself a lot of things. There's a
Hmm.
book, Mountaineering: Freedom of the Hills. So I had read that
Yeah.
thing back front to back,
Hmm.
and that was the opportunity for me to really practice and learn and understand all that stuff. So I kind of self-taught all those things through reading, and then I actually got to employ it, and it worked out just fine.
Yeah, I'll say. And that's a great book.
Yeah, I
I
think.
learned a lot about different gear and equipment from that book.
Yeah. That and I was a Boy Scout too, so like the Boy Scout handbook, it doesn't
Okay.
cover that stuff, but that was another one I read front to back when I was younger as well.
Wow. Wow, that's cool. So can you tell us about some of your other notable experiences on the other peaks that you've summited throughout the East Coast?
Yeah, yeah. Mount Marcy was another one. That one took me like three tries. The first time I went up was a year or two after we had done Mount Washington. I had this grand plan. I was going to go and do a long route around. I had like 25 or 30 miles planned, and we were going to go in and go up Indian Pass, come around the backside of Mount Marcy, cross over, and then come back in. So we drove from Maryland and Pennsylvania. It's like, 10, 12 hours to get to Adirondack Lodge. By the time
Hmm.
we left, we got there, it was already dark. We hiked in, I think it was like 2 or 3 miles to a little shelter, got things set up. It was like minus 20. We got our bags out, cooked dinner, just a three-sided type shelter. And the next day was our plan to get up and take the first route up into Indian Pass. I think we had 8 miles planned for the day. When we took off in the morning, it was probably 6 to 8 inches of snow. We didn't bring snowshoes, which was a mistake. Um, and when we hiked up to Indian Pass, there's definitely a split in the trail, and you could see when you looked left, it was kind of packed down with people walking. Indian Pass had not been touched at all, so there was way deeper snow. Even there was snow on the trees. So as we were walking up the trail, we were scrubbing trees and other landmarks trying to find the blazes. So that was
Wow.
definitely interesting. Um, we were hiking all day. A couple notable points on Indian Pass. As you're going in, there's this area, and it just had a ladder that kind of goes down a small cliff that was maybe like 10, 15 feet. So we got to that, and the freeze and thaw, the snow had melted, created like a ice fall down the ladder, so you couldn't actually go up and down the ladder.
Oops.
We were prepared to climb the mountain, so we had our ice axes, we had our crampons. So we basically like kicked steps down and used our single ice axe to down climb, and then we just tossed our packs off and did that and kept going. So that was
Wow.
like the first big obstacle we had when we were on Indian Pass, besides just the trail and conditions. So it was like that was probably around midday. We were starting to get to the point of like, oh my gosh, we're not making much time between scrubbing the trees, the ice features. We were going way slower than we had intended.
Sure.
So we kept pushing and pushing. Um, we didn't make the next shelter by the time it had gotten dark, and we skipped eating. Um, so once it got dark, we're like, we're not making it. We got to camp right here. We stopped, got clothes back on, pulled out tents. We set up the tent. I started shaking. I lost all my dexterity in my fingers, still 20 below. And that, like, I ended up getting hypothermia that night. So jumped in the sleeping bag, spent like 2 hours in the sleeping bag, huddled up, and then I started warming back up, got food out, ate dinner, and then we called that trip that night. We're just like, okay, we're done. We're heading out.
Yeah.
So that was
Wow.
attempt one
Okay.
on Mount Marcy.
Okay. One out of, was it three?
1 out of 3. Yeah. So,
Okay. All
so
right.
second attempt, I went up the next year, and I had planned, I was like, I'm going to ski in, I'll go way faster, uh, go from Adirondack Lodge. So I brought my skis up. I had skins and everything. I skinned in. And have you done Mount Marcy yet?
No.
Okay. So if you're coming in from Adirondack Lodge, there's a point where you're going in the trail, and it's kind of a notable rise, and you hit the top of this rise and you can see the mountain kind of through the trees in the distance, and you're kind of close.
Okay.
Um, Lessons learned from last time. I'm setting a better cutoff time. So it was like 1 in the afternoon, to make sure I had time to get back, because I had just planned to do an in and out hike. So I got to that point where the rise was. It was like 1 o'clock. I'm like, I'm not going to make it. So I'm turning around and going down. So I pull the skins off the skis, and I realized I am not as good of a skier as I had thought. So the trail wasn't as very wide. Started going down, losing control. I fell twice, got back up, and it was the third time I kind of crashed into this big lump of snow. And underneath that snow was a rock, right? So I'm like, I'm going to kill myself here. So I ended up taking the skis off, and immediately I'm post holing up to my knees in snow, trying to get out. So I continue doing that. But I get out at a little after dark. It was, like 5 or 5:30, got back to the car. That was the end of that trip. So
Okay. So 2 out of 3.
yep. So third time was the charm. The next time I went up, I bought snowshoes. I actually I just fixed my snowshoes from that trip. I've used them enough now that the bindings wore off. I had to drill out the old
Okay.
bindings and order some new ones and put them on. Um, so I got these snowshoes, planned the same hike, and that worked like a dream. We started. I think that one I had another person with me, and we ended up leaving like 4:30 or 5 in the morning. We got
Okay.
up to the summit around 1, and then head back out, and we got out about 5:30 with a successful hike.
Oh, perfect.
Yeah.
Wow. Everyone I've spoken with so far has said that Mount Marcy was way more difficult than they thought it would be.
Yes. That was definitely. It's not so much the height of the mountain; it's the hike in. That's what gets you.
Okay. Well, and then the time of year you do it too.
Yes, yeah. But either way, it's a long hike. It's not,
Hmm.
even Mount Washington. I've done it a couple other times, and I think the last 2 times I've done it, we started at the base, hiked all the way up, and came back out in a day. And I think it's
Hmm.
3.5 miles to the summit, so it's not bad at all. But Marcy is like an all-day hike.
So talk about, you are the first person so far on this podcast to do the main high point. Can you tell us about that?
Yeah, Katahdin was a lot of fun. So
Hmm.
one of the things that's interesting with Katahdin in the winter, you have to apply for a permit. So they don't just let anybody in there. So I had to report myself as the trip leader and write down all my mountaineering experience. So I used Mount Washington, Mount Marcy, those kinds of things
Mm-hmm.
to, lay down. And then we had to provide experience for everybody else to get permission
Yeah.
in. So that process was pretty interesting. Little nerve wracking because you're like, are they going to approve me or not? I don't know. Um,
Mm-hmm.
but we did the ski in for Katahdin, um, and there's a cabin um, that's about 10 miles or so from the summit, and we skied into there. It's about 7 miles in, and ended up posting up in this cabin, which was super nice. It had a little fireplace, and it was right by a pond, and so we skied in there. Got the next day, hiked out. The hike up to Katahdin was very interesting. Fortunately, that one was right in the middle of March or beginning of March, so it was like towards the end of the actual winter time frame. It was
Okay.
relatively warm in the 30s when we went up, so we were all kind of like, man, it's too hot to be hiking this. But there was
Wow.
still quite a bit of snow. They had some of the places on the trail was really difficult because the snow was so deep. You're like walking through the crowns of the trees, and you couldn't really see the trail markers either. So you're like going through the
Mm.
crowns of trees on, probably 4 or 5 feet of snow. Fortunately, we weren't post holing or anything there to get through some of the sections. And you have this great little scramble up through little rocky outcropping to get to kind of like
Okay.
the top area where it's a little more flat, generally rising. That was a little more windswept, so you could see some of the rocks and stuff for the last 2.5 miles up to the summit and back down. And then that was like early leave in the morning, get back to the cabin. I remember when we got back down from Katahdin after the hike, we ate, and I think we went through probably like 6 or 7 freeze-dried meals because we were so hungry after doing the hike all day. So we had like a
Yeah. A
little,
lot of calories.
yeah, it was a lot of calories, and it was like a smorgasbord where everybody kind of picked their favorite meal and cooked that, and we all shared and everything just because we were so hungry. Um,
Wow.
and the other notable thing with Katahdin was I didn't bring enough water with me. We did have like a water filter, and so when we got to the summit, I had finished my water, and we were hiking back down, and we finally came to a little stream, and I tend to hike a little bit faster, so I was out in front of everybody, and they rolled up, and I was just having to sit there like listening to the stream run and dreaming about the water because I was so thirsty at that point before everybody else showed up and we could filter some water and keep going.
So, do you ever see anyone else
Oh yeah,
while you're hiking in?
yeah.
I mean, I just figured since it's a winter ascent, you might be the only one out there, but you're not.
No, but like Katahdin, we actually didn't see many people on Katahdin. A lot of people go on the other side and would hike Knife Edge, and there's a big ice climbing area there. So I think most
Oh, okay.
folks were gravitating over that way. But where we were, we saw
Sure.
one other person on the way in, and that was it. Mount Marcy, you might pass 1 or 2 people. It's not a lot of people, but you'll still see
Hmm.
some people out there. And even like Mount Rogers, I was surprised. Just this year, we had hiked in and we got to the top, and there was already somebody up there. It was 2 ladies were had a little fire going, and I was shocked to see them. So I was just like, man, I didn't expect to see anybody, and I did see them.
Yeah. Oh, that's cool. Do you see horses while you're up there? Everyone always talks
Yes,
about the wild horses.
yes,
Yeah.
yeah. Both times we went up, we saw the wild horses. They're pretty cool. I mean, the one we had a little gelding up there that was like it had to be just a couple weeks old. It was tiny. I mean, The
Oh,
ponies are tiny anyway, but the baby was super tiny, super cute.
like a little dog.
Yeah, and you could go pretty close
Oh,
to him. Like we could have touched him if we wanted to, but I was trying to keep my distance.
yeah. I've had people on here that say they fed them like
Yeah,
fruit.
yeah. I'm sure they
That's
took
really
it.
cool.
Yeah.
Yeah, yeah. Oh, that's awesome. Tell me about a high point that just went really well that you enjoyed.
Oh, geez. Um,
It's hard, isn't
it's like,
it?
yeah, it's like all the little ones are like. So when we're doing all these bigger ones, we hit a lot of those northeast high points on the way to Washington or Katahdin. When we were all driving up to Katahdin, we're like out of a joke, we're all like, "Hey, let's go hit Rhode Island." Um, so we had the little hike in and stuff. So those are the ones that are like super easy and just kind of like funny or going forward. It's they're just memorable because they're that kind of smooth or easy. Even
Right.
like
Yeah.
a lot of people I see on the high pointing page or with Delaware, it's like kind of a drive up, like some people are holding their ice axe, out of a joke. So
Oh, that's
those are the
funny.
ones that are kind of fun and they're memorable in their own way just because you go from something like Mount Marcy, which was a grind, to where you jump out of your car, walk a couple hundred feet. Those are pretty easy. Um, I think I think it was Massachusetts. That was one where we had planned like three high points on that trip, and it was like dedicated going up, and we're gonna hit Massachusetts, I think, um, Connecticut, and there might have been one other one there. What is the other one that's close by? I'm looking at
Is
my
it New
high point.
Jersey?
Maybe it was New Jersey. Yeah, I think we did New Jersey, Connecticut, and Massachusetts all in one. And
Mm-hmm.
that Massachusetts one is a gorgeous hike. It's kind of open, um, had a lot of birch trees, and I really like the monument at the top there. It's kind of like a ball on the
Mm-hmm.
top of it. Um, so that one was a lot of fun. We did have to crampon up, not going up it, but going down it. So
Really?
yeah, when we crested the top, kind of got our monument high point photos, we started going down the other side and it was just like super slippy ice. Um, it was almost like a stream going down the trail. So we had to crampon up and walk out with the crampons on for a couple miles. Um, and when you get back to the car area and the bottom of the hills, you can look back up and the mountain is prominently sticking up out. So it was kind of cool. Like, oh, I was just there, and it was neat to see like what went up and came down. So that one was pretty memorable, and a lot of fun.
Yeah, that is cool.
One of the things like I've always done, even like the backpacking trips, like I don't want to go with a guide service. Like that's part of the experience for me is like researching the trails and okay, what route am I going to take? All that kind of stuff. I like doing
Mhm.
that too. So I kind of look forward to that and I definitely wouldn't want to try to use a guide service. Even if I did the mountain during the normal season, I would like
Mhm.
try to stay away. But there's some that, are tough to do like that. So um,
Yeah.
it'll be a challenge.
Well, and if you have the experience, then, you know, that's cool. I remember on Rainier there were people that did not know what they were doing.
Yeah,
And there was this one guy, he wore his crampons backwards. Like not even
that's
on the wrong
impressive.
foot. They were backwards. And he passed us and our guides were like trying to help him out, but he was, probably a little prideful and was like, no, no, these are fine.
Yeah.
They were just so backwards though. And then he did get stuck and the Park Service had to go in and like rescue him. But I think as long as you're not like that guy and it You're absolutely not, obviously. But there were, plenty of capable people on the mountain that just get a permit and, do it by themselves.
Yeah, it's funny you mentioned that. Like so not a state high point, but I've climbed Mount Shasta as well. And
Oh, fun.
my mountaineering boots are like old school double leather boots.
Hmm.
So they kind of stick out. Like most people these days have plastics.
Yeah.
And we had hiked in, we're going up the mountain there, and a guy like is going up to the one camp, and he's kind of passing us while we're resting and stuff. And we see him kind of look at us, and makes a beeline over to us and is like, "Hey, are you guys gonna be okay?" And we're like, "Yeah, we're good." And we're like, "That was the oddest thing. Like, why did he do that?" And we kept climbing that day, and we had set up camp, and we were talking. He's like, my friend that was with me was like, "I think it's your boots, because they don't look like the right kind of boots
He didn't,
to do the
he
climb."
didn't recognize them.
Yeah, he's
Wow.
like, those are just regular leather boots. Like he shouldn't be climbing in those. So, not knowing that they were, double boots, just happened to be leather. But we think that was
Yeah.
the thing that, like you said, like, hey, these guys don't know what they're doing. I need to go talk to them. Other things about me, maybe interesting, is I worked in outdoor shops. So high school,
Okay.
college, and I'm a gear junkie. So I have a gear closet. I'm on the verge of needing to go to a gear room. Um, so I've got, like 4 sleeping bags, 3 backpacks, multiple pairs of boots. Last trip
Hmm.
on Mount Rogers, I forgot my boots. They were sitting here on the stairwell, and I totally forgot them. So I had to buy a new pair on the way down. A couple different stoves. So it's just like I open up this closet and things almost are falling out at me at this point, where it's like I just have so much stuff for over the years that I've acquired for all the stuff I like to do.
Do you want to talk about some of the other outdoor adventures you do outside of
Yeah,
high pointing?
yeah, sure. So backpacking, did a bunch of that. So high school, I've hiked basically from West Virginia, Maryland, and 2/3 of Pennsylvania to Port Clinton. Um, so that's something that I've got on my belt. I was a rock climber, rock climb for 15, 20 years. I'm trying to get back into it this winter. Um, I'm trying to build my muscle back up and recover from some injuries to my back and things. So getting back into that. But I was like a 5'12" climber in college, um, sport climbing, trad climbing. Have actually fallen trad climbing, which was a lot of fun.
Oh.
Um,
Where do you like to climb?
so I went to college in West Virginia University. Let's go Mountaineers. Um, and my main area was all around West Virginia or in Morgantown. So there's tons of places right around there, Pioneer Rocks, Cooper's Rock. So those were like kind of my home crags. And Cooper's
Cool.
will always hold like a little special place in my heart of, a local park that I kind of knew all the nooks and crannies. There's the main areas you go to, but a lot of the crags and stuff are off, in the woods, and there's not a trail to them. So you're kind of running your way through there. And of course, I
Cool.
climbed New River Gorge, Seneca Rocks, um, Tennessee Wall is where I took my trad fall on Goldilocks, which is a 5'9" that's like more like a 5'10", and so did that quite a bit all around the East Coast, a little bit here and there in other states like California and stuff too. So I definitely like doing that. Um, have a good bit of canoe experience. Canoeing in high school, we would take a couple-week trip every year to Canada, and we would canoe either Algonquin or Chippewa Park, and pack all your gear in the canoe, and then go out for a couple weeks, which was a lot of fun. And we'd always end doing a whitewater raft trip, and I've been mountain biking since about 1993, I think is when I bought my first mountain bike. I worked all summer at a job. I was supposed to use it for college, and I bought a mountain bike, and my parents weren't super happy with me on that one. And as I've gotten to Maryland, particularly where I live, I was a rock climber when I got here, and I was doing the tour of our local base, and I was like, hey, there's cliffs over there. And come to find out, they're all like clay cliffs that are eroding into the Chesapeake Bay. So there's no rocks on there. So I've been taking more to mountain biking and road biking here in the past couple of years.
Okay.
And even the mountain biking has been shifting me over to trail work, trail building, trail maintenance, and doing a nonprofit for that. I help maintain the trails that are a mile and a half from my house at St. Mary's River State Park, and been doing that for like 10 years as a little nonprofit, which has been a pretty cool experience, and a lot of new learning and skills. It's one thing to hike a trail, and it's another thing to be like, hey, I think a trail can go here, and this is what it should look like, and laying
Yeah.
it out and then actually building it. It's just been pretty cool.
Wow, that's such a great thing for your community.
It's been working out good. We've doubled out the size of our trail system. It was like 7.5 miles, and now it's like 15. So
Wow, cool.
it's a bit of big difference, and we have a lot of low-lying wet areas, and we've helped pick
Hmm.
those up. When I first came here, you would ride through the trails, and you'd go up to your hubs in mud, where there was just no bridge and this little stream crossing at the head of the lake. That stuff has all been cleaned up now, and you can pretty much go around without getting your self too muddy. There's still a couple spots, but nowhere near was like it was when I first started riding here.
So, how many people are in this nonprofit endeavor with you?
That's a good question. So it's one of the key issues we're facing right now is we have a Facebook page. There's 200 plus people on it, and we have 9 official members. So our nonprofit is Southern Maryland Mountain Bike, and we're a chapter of IMBA. And the challenge we're facing right now is we have over 200 members on our Facebook page and 9 paying members. So the whole chapter program works where IMBA gets a share of your membership dues, and then the other half comes to us, and we have to pay things like insurance and keeping web pages open, and then shuffling money over for trail maintenance. So we finished our beginner loop trail that I'd been working on for 6 years this past winter in February, and I had to pay for some extra expenditures. There was an extra bridge we had to do that we hadn't really planned for in our grant, so had to use some of that club money. And now I'm struggling, like, how am I going to pay insurance for next year?
Yeah.
For our local park, it's a great thing, being able to take the trails. And I always say we're a nonprofit that's a mountain biking club, but we're building, maintaining trails for all trail users. So it's hikers, bikers, equestrians, trail runners, everybody that uses that trail system. So, anything you can do to either join the IMBA program, send it to SMMB would be great. And, even if it's not our local chapter, helping that is just a great thing to give people places to go to enjoy the outdoors. So, support IMBA, support your local trail systems. It's a great activity and nonprofit.
When you go out to do these high points or any hike, really, do you go with anyone else? Do you like to share in this hobby with anyone?
Yeah, it's a mix actually. So, and it's changed over time. In high school, I had a good friend of mine that was in Boy Scouts with me, and we started doing bigger and bigger trips. He was the one that went on Mount Washington
Hmm.
with me. So that's Jeff Brick. And, we kind of grew up doing that stuff and getting to larger trips. As I moved to West Virginia, um, there I was doing a lot more climbing, but a lot of the backpacking trips I would do were more solo hikes. I remember doing Otter Creek, um, right there in West Virginia. It was 20 miles out and back, and just drove out there one night, hiked all the way out, set up camp in the middle of the field at night, saw all the eyes of the deer staring at me with my headlamp on, and then hiked out the next day. Um, so I had done some stuff with that, but it was more solo, and even a couple of the other trips I had done solo. Um, those two Mount Marcy trips were ones I had done solo initially, but the third time when I did with snowshoes, I had a friend with me that was local here in Maryland. So Dan Slick is another guy that I've done a lot of those hikes with. Introduced him to Mount Washington, and then took him over to do Mount Marcy again once he was kind of getting into that. And he's got a ton of experience more with, he had done a lot of the Cascade Mountains, and he's the one that I went to Mount Shasta with. So just
Oh,
doing
cool.
other mountaineering experiences, but not necessarily high points. But
Yeah.
he introduced me to a couple other folks. So I have a friend, Eric Baker, I know through Dan Slick. And he's been my more recent partner because Dan has moved to Texas. We may go out and do the Texas High Point with him one of these winters. But right now I'm hiking with Eric Baker, and he was out with me on Mount Rogers.
When you tell people that are not hikers or high pointers or climbers or anything, what you do, these winter ascents of high points, what do they say?
It really depends on the peak I'm going to. Um, the first time I remember telling my mom, like, I'm going to go climb Mount Washington in winter. And she said, no, you're not. You're not doing that. That's dangerous. So
Yeah.
I get those kinds of reactions sometimes, but if you're going and like, oh, I went to Delaware and did the high peak, they're like, oh, okay, you know, don't think much of it. So you get the broad span of different reactions depending on who you're talking to and what mountain you're doing. So,
Hmm.
when you tell folks, hey, I did Rainier, it's probably a bigger eye pop than some of the other ones that are out there. So I think that's the
Hmm.
general consensus. And even, East Coast peaks aren't considered as big a deals as the West Coast peaks. Um, so that's where you get a big variation of uh, people's reactions. So it's always interesting and fun to see what they're going to say, though.
It is. And you'd be surprised about the Rainier reactions. When I was in Seattle, I don't know where I was, like getting a cup of coffee somewhere downtown, and standing in line, and someone asked me if I was like visiting or something. And I said, yeah, I'm coming here from North Carolina. And they said, oh, for what? I said, well, I'm going to climb Mount Rainier tomorrow. They're like, why?
Yeah,
And they're, they see it every day. Um, and I didn't really know what to say. I didn't want to give like a cheesy answer. I didn't want to give just cause it's there. So I just kind of went along with it, and I'm like, I don't know, man.
yeah, yeah. That's always a tough question. There's people that just don't get it. Um, I've since
Hmm.
learned about the different types of fun. I don't know. Have you heard about the different types of fun?
No.
So
Oh, is it the like type A, type B?
it's type one, type two, type three fun. So type one is like you go out and do it. It's like mountain biking for an hour. Oh, that was fun, right? The type two fun
Yes.
is the stuff that's, mountaineering, maybe a century or a marathon. It takes you, 4 to 8 hours to go do. While you're doing it, it's terrible, right? You're like, this is the worst thing ever. Why did I do this, right? And then you get
Yeah.
done and you're like, that was fun. When am I going again? Right. And then the type
Hmm.
three type fun is like, like an ultra marathon or something, um, where they say it's just not fun altogether. So maybe some high points are like that. But I usually get to the end of them and
Yeah.
I'm like, when am I going to go to the next one? And it's, as we're rolling into the winter time, I start thinking like in September, like, oh, I'm looking forward to going to doing this peak, and my head gets racing about, okay, which one am I going to do? How am I going to plan it out? All that kind of stuff.
Yeah. Now that you mention the different types of fun, I have heard about that. And it was in another podcast called the Adventure Sports Podcast. And it's hosted by this guy called Mason Gravely, and he's fantastic. He has all these people on who do a lot of crazy, extreme things. But he did explain the different types of fun. And the more I interview people for this project, the more I hear them say, I used to like doing vacations like on a cruise or something, laying on a beach, getting served drinks or something. But now I like to do something where there's a reward. And it's interesting how the type 2 kind of fun is more sought after, I think, by a certain type of person than the
Yeah.
type 1, the more obvious instant type of fun.
I can sit on a beach for like a day and then I'm like, okay, now what are we doing? So yeah, I struggle with that a little bit, but I've always been that way. Um, so I've never kind of fit into that mold of sitting there and doing nothing, and that's fun. I got to be doing something. Like, do you remember the cruise where nothing happened? That's the thing. That's where you know Mount Marcy is going to live in my brain forever. Of climbing down ladders and going out the wrong way on Indian Pass and getting frostbite or hypothermia.
Yeah.
Those are the things that are definitely memorable.
So which state high point was your favorite?
Favorite is probably that Massachusetts one was pretty memorable. It's hard to pick one. Katahdin for its remoteness and not seeing anybody.
Hmm.
Washington is always an interesting one with the weather. I when in Washington I've been up on the Alpine Garden when it's blowing 75 miles an hour and you're struggling to stand up. Um, those things all stick out.
Wow.
Um, but
Hmm.
it's one of those probably three. Um, I didn't tell you much about Mansfield, but that one was pretty memorable too. It's not a big hike in there, but that was one when we got up to the summit that it was blowing like crazy. It was, probably 60 miles an hour, maybe gusting a little bit longer.
Wow.
And it was just kind of hard to stand. And we got up there and it was long enough to get to the summit, take a couple of pictures, and we're like, okay, we got to get out of here. It's too windy.
Wow.
Um, so that one was memorable too. And we had a lot of, that was one where it was kind of melting. You could hear the stream running under the snow, but you couldn't see it. And then you were post holing a lot on that trail. That one would have been good for
Yeah.
snowshoes as well. There was another group of people that were with us, and they went over the snow bridges, and the guy fell through into the creek, and
Oh no.
he actually had to go up to the shelter that's like just below the summit and like change clothes because he was just
Yeah.
soaked from falling in the creek. Have you seen Touching the Void?
Yes.
Okay. So
Yes.
I went
And
to the premiere in DC and the climber was there.
oh, okay.
Yeah.
Really? What was that like?
It was, it was, he, at the end of the movie, he kind of got up and did a talk and, I did
Yeah.
Q&A and stuff. And I don't know if you remember this scene, but it's like he's coming down and just delirious,
Hmm.
totally uh, like super thirsty. He hasn't eaten anything, and he comes to the cliff, and it's like water running down. And when he's making that final trek to where the water is and stuff, there's a British song that comes on, and everybody in the audience laughs. And he was like, it always strikes me odd when people laugh at that part because it was like one of the worst things in my life where this I'm
Yeah.
like I'm literally dying of thirst and starvation and this song's just like going in my head and I can't make it stop
That's right.
and it was like that
Yeah.
resonated so much with me and I could totally see from his point of view is like that wasn't funny but the
No,
audience
not
at the
at all.
time is just like it's this really kooky song um,
I
So
remember that. It was like some kind of 80s sounding
yeah,
song that just it comes out of nowhere. Like I get it, he's hallucinating, but it's unexpected, and I guess that's why people might have laughed.
yeah, yeah. It's almost like one of those things like, you see somebody fall and, really hurt themselves, but you're laughing. I've had that experience a couple
Mhm.
times, mountain biking.
So I actually read the book first
Me
before
too.
I saw the movie. And that I think that's the only story where I can say I prefer the movie over the book because when I was reading the book, I remember it was so hard to visualize the crevasse and how complicated that whole system was down there and what he was trying to do. And then when I saw the movie, I'm like, okay, yeah, I get it now.
Yeah.
This makes a lot more sense. Just to see how intricate that whole system was. What are the benefits you would say you get from high pointing?
I just like the trips. I mean,
Yeah.
that's my thing. Is like I like to travel. I like, to do stuff, but I don't necessarily and like I've actually only been to Hawaii. I've never been off of North America. I've been to Mexico, Canada, and continental United States and Hawaii.
Hmm.
So I always feel like there's so much in the U.S. to do that I haven't really desired to go elsewhere. And I'm also like, it doesn't have to be big adventure, right? So
Yeah.
that's what I think is great about high pointing. It's like these small little adventures you can have just right out the back of your door, no matter what
Hmm.
state you're in. So I think that's really the cool thing with high pointing that I enjoy and get out of it is the opportunity. And the other thing I'll say is I'm pretty goal oriented, so I get these goals I'm trying to achieve, and I just like focused in on them. And I'm trying to do it. I did that with rock climbing. I'm like, I want to
Hmm.
get this route done, or I want to climb at this level, and I just keep, working at it and going off of it until I kind of achieve it. So that's
Yeah.
something else. I really enjoy that feeling of success, ticking one more thing off
Hmm.
off the list. I'm not a big list person, um, but with high pointing, it's kind of a cool thing, and it's that type two fun you get. Like, oh, I did that, I accomplished it.